Hi, if you're watching this, you're probably one of my Facebook friends, and you're probably well aware that I'm very passionate about the sport of wrestling. You may have noticed many posts recently relating to keeping Olympic wrestling. And you may be asking yourself, well, why is Lance posting all this about Olympic wrestling? Or why does it mean so much to him? So if you'll humor me, I'd like to explain why this is so important and kind of explain the path of where wrestling's at, or what's going on right now, what threats face the sport. So first of all, to give you a little bit of background, in February of 2013, the Executive Board of the International Olympic Committee, or IOC, met, and they voted to recommend dropping wrestling as one of the 25 core Olympic sports for the year 2020 and beyond. So that announcement came as a huge shock to the wrestling community, because many of us felt that wrestling was safe.
So what this means is the obvious. For athletes, it's an opportunity lost. They're not going to have the opportunity to compete in the Olympic Games if we're not able to get it saved for the 2020 Olympics. There's one Olympics left. So, for any athletes that have wanted to make an Olympic team for wrestling, if we fail to save this sport for 2020, there's one Olympic Games left, and that's their last and only opportunity they'll have to compete in the Olympics. But let's also consider what this would mean for the Olympics, because I don't think this is just something that's going to hurt the sport of wrestling. I think it's also detrimental to the Olympics if they lose wrestling. Wrestling is one of the oldest sports in the world. In fact, it's arguably the oldest sport. It's been depicted in cave paintings dating back to 3000 BC. It's a sport that's referenced in the Bible. This is a sport that was a part of the ancient Olympic Games, and this is a sport that has always had a presence in the modern Olympics. If we eliminate the sport of wrestling, which has such a long-standing tradition in the Olympics, I think people are going to notice. They may not notice immediately, but down the road, people are going to start noticing that something is missing from the Olympics. It's not what it used to be. Sports like wrestling and track and field, I think, are essential sports. They have to be there. And you would be hard-pressed to find another sport that better meets the ideals of the Olympics. This is a sport for everybody. You don't have to be particularly big or particularly tall or particularly fast or strong. You don't have to be rich. I've known athletes that have competed and done well that are physically handicapped. My alma mater used to have a wrestler when he was in high school who was blind, and he qualified for an athletic scholarship to Stanford University. When I was coaching, we had a hearing impaired program at Downey High School. That gave me the opportunity to work with deaf athletes, and one of my best heavyweights was deaf. Many of these athletes wouldn't find an opportunity to participate in many other sports, but they've had an opportunity to compete and excel in the sport of wrestling. Anthony Robles has only one leg, but yet went on to win the NC2A Division I Wrestling Championships. This is the highest level in college wrestling, and he was a national champion. So the fact of the matter is that wrestling provides opportunities for everybody. And this is a sport that is widely participated in. Like I said, it's not an expensive sport. You don't have to be rich. You have a level surface, two people, you can wrestle. This is a sport that is widely participated in. FILA, the international governing body, has 177 member nations. 71 different nations qualified to participate in wrestling at the 2012 Olympics. 29 countries medaled. There were some sports that didn't even have 29 countries participating in the sport, and yet wrestling had 29 different countries medaling at the 2012 Olympics. So this is a very international sport. Many countries have strong traditions in the sport where wrestling is a part of the culture, and they have their own unique wrestling styles in addition to the traditional traditional Olympic styles. They have their own traditional styles that are a part of their culture. It would be hard-pressed to find a sport that builds more character than the sport of wrestling as well. Wrestlers go through a tremendous amount just to get on the mat. They have to make weight. They got to, watch what they eat. They have to be disciplined in their training. They have to be disciplined in their diet. When they get out there and compete, even when they get tired, even when they're exhausted, they have to keep pushing hard because there's a guy standing across the mat from them that's trying to tear their head off. Wrestling mirrors the challenges that we face in life, the difficulties. And if you can make it through wrestling, it really builds that sense of confidence that you can make it through anything. And there's a certain mentality that wrestlers develop, and it's a mentality that is so necessary in this world. It's a mentality of overcoming obstacles and not letting fear stand in the way of your dreams, and just pushing hard and pushing till you get the result, not quitting, persevering. No other sport that I know of teaches this as well as the sport of wrestling. There are other concerns that I have about wrestling being eliminated from the Olympics. If you eliminate wrestling from the Olympics, then what happens is wrestling is no longer an Olympic sport. As such, USA Wrestling, the national governing body for the sport in the United States, they lose funding. They're not going to be able to send teams internationally to compete. They're going to have a hard time preparing our athletes to compete on an international level. They're going to have a hard time promoting the sport, and it makes it much more difficult for USA Wrestling as well as for wrestlers in general to try to find support, try to find sponsors. It's a lot easier to find support behind an Olympic sport than it is behind a non-Olympic sport. It's also easier to generate press and media coverage when you're in an Olympic sport versus a non-Olympic sport. Furthermore, we're at a point in time as well where this could have a very catastrophic effect on the sport scholastically. We're seeing youth participation in the sport of wrestling growing tremendously. It's growing amongst both genders. We're seeing high school wrestling growing, but at the collegiate level, the sport has suffered because 40 years ago, some legislation was passed known as Title IX. Title IX was designed to provide gender equity in education in institutions that received public funding. Unfortunately, in practice, what Title IX has done is it has allowed the elimination of many men's sports teams because there's something called proportionality. And basically what that states is that, let's say 60% of your student enrollment is female, then 60% of your student athletes should be female. Well, we have sports like football, which is basically an all-male sport. There's no female counterpart, but it's the big money maker for college sports. So most sports programs or most schools don't want to cut their football. But wrestling, which traditionally has been an all-male sport, although there are now some women's college programs, but traditionally because it's been an all-male sport, wrestling has been targeted much more than most other sports. Many college wrestling programs have been eliminated over the last 40 years, and this has happened on a nationwide basis. But it's hit California incredibly hard as well. So, let's take a look at the devastating effect that it's had on the sport here in California. So let's look at the impact of Title IX on college wrestling in California. The COA, or community college or junior college programs, more than 50 programs have been dropped, only 20 remain, less than 1/3 of all COA programs. Now, look at the NAIA. 4 programs have been dropped, only 2 remain. Menlo College, which was added in 2001, and Simpson University, which was just added a couple years ago. NCAA Division III. 10 programs have been dropped, no programs remain. NCAA Division II. 4 programs dropped. Only 2 remain. Only San Francisco State, which has been on shaky ground in the past, and Cal Baptist, which is relatively new. NCAA Division I, the highest level of college wrestling. 15 programs dropped. Only 3 remain. Cal State Bakersfield, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and Stanford University. So overall, with over 700 high school programs, 85 college programs have been dropped in California, 27 remain, and only 7 are 4-year colleges. You know, and I know what it's like not to have the opportunity to participate in a sport if you really want to have the opportunity to. You know, I grew up in my neighborhood. We wrestled in our front yards. I loved the sport. When I got into junior high, we didn't have a program, but they offered wrestling and PE, and they did an intramural tournament. I took second. The guy I lost to, he went to the crosstown rival in high school and wrestled varsity as a freshman. He kept trying to talk me into transferring over there because my high school dropped wrestling a couple years before I entered. I didn't get the opportunity to wrestle until I was a junior. And by then, we were already behind. Nobody on the team even had experience. We couldn't even learn from each other. Fortunately, we had a good coach. Then, after 2 years of wrestling at the community college level, I transferred to CSU Stanislaus, which was one of the Division III programs that had previously been dropped. So I didn't get the opportunity to compete there. Fortunately, though, I got involved in coaching high school wrestling while I was in my last 2 years of college, and I was able to compete in the international styles of freestyle and Greco-Roman. Had it not been for that, I wouldn't have been able to have that opportunity. I was fortunate to have that opportunity available to me, and the coaching changed my life. The fact of the matter is that because I stayed with the sport and I got involved in coaching, I learned what it was like to be able to have an impact on the lives of young people. That's what drove me into coaching and finally gave me the opportunity to become a teacher. You know, I wouldn't have pursued teaching, but the fact of the matter is that because I was coaching and I had the opportunity to take over my high school program from my high school wrestling coach, I decided that, you know, that was an opportunity I didn't want to pass up. I knew what it meant to work with young people and to have an impact on their lives. And the only job I really could think of that I could find would work around coaching was teaching. And that led me into teaching. I've been teaching high school now for 16 years. And, you know, today I work with at-risk youth. I work with kids who, many of them come from a tremendously disadvantaged background. They have messed up home lives. And, you know, I have that opportunity to have an impact on their lives and to make a difference. That's an impact that came directly because of my involvement with the sport of wrestling. I would not have chosen teaching. I don't even know what I'd be doing today had it not been for the sport of wrestling. I thank my lucky stars that I got involved in coaching and that I had the opportunity to become a teacher thanks to wrestling. It's made a difference in my life. So that's what's at stake. That's why I feel it's so important that we fight to protect this sport and to keep its Olympic status. I don't want to see anybody else deprived of the opportunity to benefit from participating in the sport of wrestling. What you can do to help out is go to www.keepolympicwrestling.com. This website has a wealth of information that will help you as far as learning what you can do to help out. It gives you history of the sport and keeps you updated on the latest developments in the effort to keep wrestling in the Olympics.